Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Greg Gurniak, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Greg, for those who don't know you or your background, why don't you tell me something about you? What's your journey?
Most recently, I'm a metaphysical minister, recently ordained. I'm an acupuncturist in traditional and Chinese medicine. I'm a clinical and medical hypnotist as well. My initial training after high school and post-secondary was to become a radiation therapist. And I was one of the very first of two students chosen to train here locally in the Windsor Regional Cancer Center. After my 2 years of training, part of it was a didactic program in Toronto at the Princess Margaret Hospital, and the clinical portion was done here at the Cancer Center in Windsor. I became licensed and decided to go and work for about a year in Michigan because I'm in southern Ontario near the Detroit, Michigan border. And so I decided to get some experience in a different cancer center. So I did that for about a year and then returned back to Windsor, where after about an additional year, I became the program coordinator and clinical instructor running the school to train radiation therapists. And during that time, I got a lot of experience by getting an adult teaching certificate. I was involved in patient education and communications in the cancer center. I had a bit of a diverse background there in my job description. I became interested in holistic care and started taking some courses locally at a school that was here in Windsor. It's no longer here. Started doing some courses there. One led to another, and started adding to my holistic treatment toolbox, where I then decided to become a hypnotist and continued my work at the cancer center. I worked part-time and holistic care on evenings and weekends when I wasn't working at the cancer center. And then after 20 years of service, had a workplace injury and was sidelined. And my workplace came to me after doing some work hardening and said, if you can't do 100% of the job, don't come back tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I had no choice but to reinvent myself at that point and look at a full-time holistic career. I went back to acupuncture school, and then, like I said, most recently decided to go back to school in a doctoral program and was recently ordained.
Wow, what a career. I mean, cancer center, radiation therapist, adult education, holistic care, acupuncture, hypnotist, and ordained. You have gone through yourself a number of transitions.
I have.
Greg, where have you, either for yourself or for someone who's asked for your help, been a part of a transition? And you just described a number of them. And talk to us about what that transition was like.
I would say, and I'm going to use myself as an example, because I believe that the transition after having been quite a dedicated employee for so long and then to be treated so poorly was challenging mentally. I wasn't treated well by my employer afterwards either for a number of years. And it became very difficult to have to deal with that, as well as figure out what am I going to do? Because although I had had a number of years of service, I was still fairly young and still needed to have an income. I was not anywhere near retirement age. And so I really wasn't sure how this was all going to play out. In my region, we're a heavy automotive town. And if people don't have coverage of insurance, generally, they're not interested in treatment if they have to pay out of pocket for anything that's not, if it's not a dental service or some sort of an emergent kind of service. So even massage or Reiki or whatever, people weren't really willing to explore that or pay for it. So I met with a lot of opposition. If it's not covered, well, I'm not interested. Can you help me with my sore knee? Yes, but it's not covered. Oh, well, okay, bye. That was the response you would get. So that made it challenging. So the way I dealt with that was with the hypnosis. I used that. I made some recordings for myself to listen to help bring up my self-esteem, to help motivate me to figure this out and to be able to feel like I can contribute to society and still be able to help people, because that was my original goal for working at the cancer center. Was I wanted to be able to help people get better.
Interesting. How does health impact in transition, and how can you maximize your health to make the most of your transition efforts?
I would say to eat well, make sure you keep a fairly good nutrition plan in place for yourself. That helps, as well as much as possible, getting some exercise, perhaps even doing some meditation. Deep breathing can be very helpful.
Greg, what keeps you grounded when you've gone through a transition? Something that someone else who's going through a transition might learn from.
I'd like to do, as I've already mentioned, do a little bit of meditation, sometimes doing some reflective work, be it whether that's writing in a journal or typing it out on the keyboard, into a Word document, and then being able to look back at things and see a bit of a pattern as to how you're improving, and look for small improvements, not large changes. Anybody that sets themselves up for a large change all at once, it's too difficult. It looks like it's too difficult. And so if they're just small little incremental changes, I look at it as if you can make even a 1% improvement day by day, then you're making progress towards your end goal.
Sometimes the journey just looks too large, too much, and so you stop. If you make it into little pieces, well, I can achieve that. And you add up all those little pieces and you get to the end of your journey. So I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah, it allows you to help keep motivated as well, because you start to see those little changes, those little increments. If you sort of give yourself a little high five to yourself, and celebrate those little wins, then you will get to that end goal.
What are some of the struggles or setbacks that you've seen in people who are going through a transition, and how do they deal with those struggles?
People sometimes get themselves into a rut, and they start to beat themselves up. I wasn't good enough, or I can't do that, and things of that nature, where they start to take their self-esteem takes a bit of a beating, and even their self-worth takes a beating. And so then they start to feel sad. And if that's allowed to progress, then they actually start to experience some signs of depression, actually, where if they're able to keep moving forward, like I had mentioned, these little 1% changes, these little improvements each day, then they can actually stave off any kind of a depressive type of symptom. And even if they can speak to a friend, or if they find a mentor that they can speak with, then just getting it out and in the open and being able to talk about it allows people to feel better about the situation. Even if it's a cruddy situation, they start to feel better, and then they can continue to move forward and improve their sense of worth and their self-esteem. And as that starts to improve, then you start to see, again, more progress towards the goal.
I believe that your life, certainly your career, is oftentimes curly as opposed to straight line. What do you think about that? And how does that help in terms of transition management that you're talking with someone about?
I think that folks need to realize that setbacks are basically a way of life, that they happen and they don't have to derail your plans. There are often workarounds or alternative ways to get to the end goal. Sometimes these, I like to call them speed bumps in life. They sometimes are a bit of a chance to reevaluate or find a different path towards that person's end goal, and that they can actually sometimes find a better path than their original thought sometimes. So again, it would help them to have more confidence and improve their self-esteem by keeping more of a positive attitude about things getting better. I basically are saying keep your chin up and keep heading forward. Every day doesn't have to be a down type of day.
Greg, you talked with me before about 4 points that you think would help make a transition easier. Share with us about those 4 points.
Sure. I've already talked a little bit about one, being the attitude, being positive and upbeat. I think if people calm themselves, they will tend to react rather than respond to a situation. And when they have these reactions, it can bring up a lot of emotions like fear or worry or panic or anger. And so sometimes they're reacting to those emotions. And if they actually think about having more of a reasoned out type of response to some of these situations that happen, they can do that better when their emotions are under control. Another point would be to be practical. I always say to folks to breathe. Take a step back from any kind of an overwhelming situation that you might be facing and just take a deep breath, and then start to think about creating a solid plan. This plan can be sort of like a recipe to follow, making these transitional type of changes a little less scary. So in this plan, if you formulate some smaller little steps, as we've already alluded to, then it's not so overwhelming. If you have a plan, you start working through it and these changes that may be necessary, and you can identify any pitfalls that can happen. So when you're looking at this plan, also look for things that may somewhat derail the plan and how you would mitigate those little detours that may occur. You don't want to be having these what if I fail thoughts. You can just let them leave your mind and just work on a practical way to find a solution and stay motivated. I guess in a sense, it would be best to say plan for the worst, but hope for the best, and don't dwell on those what ifs. And then the last would be to have that support system. Anybody that close to you that loves you, or if you have that has your best interest at heart, is going to be there to help you through a transition and help make the change. So you can tell them why you're having to make a change if you like, or you can just share with them in confidence that you are going to be making this change, whatever this change may be. And then you can ask for their help and their support as you go through this. As long as you keep a positive attitude, you think of it practically, and you follow a plan, it's best if you have a support system.
You've given a lot of really good ideas in terms of what works to help someone in transition. What have you experienced or seen that doesn't work for someone who is going through a transition?
When someone is at a point in life where they feel that anything that they do isn't going to work, they have somewhat of a negative attitude or an outlook that, and sometimes often will say, oh, I can't do that. Well, have you ever tried? And often the response is no. Well, if you could, what would that be like? And you can kind of work with folks to kind of give them a little gentle nudge, because some people just feel that they can't do something. They've never really tried to do it. It's just they feel that they're just not capable of doing it. And yet they likely have the skill set or the ability to do it. It's just they've never been presented with that opportunity before. And so sometimes giving someone just a little gentle nudge can be helpful as well.
Greg, when should a person ask for help when they're in transition? Some people think that that's a sign of weakness. So when should they ask for someone to support them in the transition?
I think that the earlier on in a transition that someone asks for some assistance, seeks out a mentor or just even a confidant just to chat about things and discuss things, is the best. To do that early on in the process rather than going through a period of time where you start to get yourself into a bit of a downward spiral where you might think of one thing or several things that then, as you do more research, you find out aren't really feasible to do. And so if you have someone to bounce ideas off of and discuss, then you can actually hit some of those speed bumps early on and not waste a lot of time, but also by keeping a more positive attitude about the whole process. So I would encourage folks to actually do that early in the process rather than later, so that you don't fall into sort of a depressed state.
You know, I've always said that the times that I've been in transition, whether they are life transitions or work or health, during the day, I was always very brave. I always seemed to have the answers. It was in the dark of the night. That was when the gremlins came out and told me, I wasn't good enough. I've been found out, or I'm an imposter, or whatever. And that brought just torrents of fear and doubt and depression to me. You've touched on a few ideas on this. What else would you tell someone that is experiencing this? What should they do to combat those gremlins in the middle of the night?
Yeah, those gremlins, they're not your friend. They really aren't. Yeah, at that point, sometimes that's when it's a good idea to keep a little notebook near the bed and jot things down. You can jot down whatever the gremlins are saying to you. And then what you can do is you can jot down the opposite and change those statements into a positive. Then you can, the next day, you can always take those positive statements, and I would write them out on a separate piece of paper. Sometimes, depending on what it is, what I'm basically suggesting is to create an affirmation. Affirmations should be in the positive sense, and sometimes people will write them out on like a little recipe card or write them out on a small piece of paper, and they'll tape them at different locations around the house, like in the bathroom on the mirror, so that you can read these 4 or 5 positive statements when you're brushing your teeth, when you're combing your hair. Sometimes people put them on the refrigerator so that when they go to get their glass of juice, or when they're making their coffee and go get the milk or creamer out, they see them and they just take a few moments just to stop and read these statements. It goes into your subconscious mind, and it's just a way of helping keep positive about situations.
You've mentioned affirmations. What are your thoughts on journaling or visual boards or other tools, techniques you might use in that transition?
I think journaling is a great idea. Even the vision boards are excellent, as long as the vision board is somewhere where you see it often enough. So if you're just seeing it, if you have it in your bedroom and you're only seeing it as you awaken and as you go to sleep each night, that's not enough. It needs to be near your workspace, somewhere where you're spending some time. So I would put it near a computer if you're at home, somewhere when you look up or away from the monitor, you're actually able to see the vision board, so that it registers a little bit more with your subconscious mind. The journaling is excellent for the actual handwriting. Journals are the best to actually register with your subconscious mind. There's a better brain connection, the neural connections and the neural pathways that are built when you actually write something out are much stronger than when you type them on a keyboard and into a Word document. So I would strongly encourage folks to journal, because it's also a record of being able to look back for progress. Or sometimes it's a way to look back and say, that's what started the derailed process. And now I can learn from that and not do that again.
Greg, how has dealing with transition and transition issues changed over the last 20 years?
I think that folks are able to get more information about how to deal with things. Many more pieces of content are available on the internet. Folks just have to Google something and they can often documents will come up, or in a search, or links to YouTube videos where folks will actually be able to describe their process and what they did. And you don't always have to follow that exact process from someone else. However, if you're checking a variety and getting a bit of a feel, sometimes just the way someone explains something, even if it's the exact same thing that you've heard in 10 other videos or read in other documents, sometimes someone just explains it a particular way that connects with you. And so I would encourage folks to not only read some documents, but also look at videos or even at podcasts to hear things, because the way everybody learns is different. So some folks are visual, some are auditory, and some need that written way of learning.
You've talked about getting someone to help support you in the transition. What are some of the characteristics that are important that person that you're reaching out to has, that they can help you most in dealing with your transition?
I guess it would depend on the transition that you're looking to make. However, I would look to see if you can become a member of a group. Maybe there's a chat group that you can become involved in, and that person may be someone that's local to you or may not be local. And if regardless, I would look for someone that is involved or has done the transition that you're looking to make. So for example, I'll pick on myself and say, if I was looking to learn more about acupuncture, then I would attempt to find someone locally that I could connect with or talk to or ask questions of that is already an acupuncturist, and find out a little bit about, well, what's it like? Learn about how one might be able to use that as a career, and just get a bit of a sense of that's something that you're really wanting to do. So I would look for someone that's got some involvement or has had some experience with that transition that you're looking to make.
Yeah, it's always difficult finding that right person, because they need to be empathetic, but they also have to be tough with you sometimes. And that's a real difficult balance to find often.
I would agree. Yeah, someone's got to be able to hold your feet to the fire if you're not performing what you need to be doing.
Greg, what books or other resources do you recommend to someone who is in transition?
Well, there's a book that I've worked on, and it's called Perspective Development. And it talks about how you can get yourself out of a fixed mindset and into a growth type of mindset.
Talk about that a little bit more for me.
It deals with folks that sometimes when you can't seem to get a handle on a habit that you might have, or if you're just wondering why you can't commit to something, or like sometimes people can't stick to a diet or have difficulty fulfilling a simple goal. Well, they're not really alone. A lot of folks, even with New Year's types of resolutions, 80% of people actually fail their resolution by the time February rolls around. So people have a lot of fears, and So it all comes down to actually being able to grow and expand your mind by getting out of this fixed mindset. And so these habits or belief patterns that often tie people to very specific experiences are sometimes painful. And so the book works at giving some different strategies that can help people to get out of that very fixed way of looking at the world.
And what is it called again? And how can our listeners get this book?
It's called Perspective Development, and it's subtitled How to Get Out of a Fixed Mindset and Into a Growth Mindset. And so what I've done is I've made a little special website just for your listeners. And so the website is mindandbodyantiaging.com/people-in-transition.
Outstanding. We'll put those in our show notes as well. Thank you, Greg, for that.
Well, you're welcome.
My experience is that people, when they listen to things, they really remember the last thing that is said. So if you want our listeners to remember 3 things from today's podcast, what are those 3 things you want them to remember?
I would say to come up with a plan, stick to it, and stay positive.
Greg Gurniak, what a great lesson in life transition that you shared with our listeners today. I love that creating the plan, stick to it, and stay positive. That's true, I think, in everything that we do, whether it's a transition or an assignment or a relationship or a diet. I think that has a great value. And I know I can speak for all of our listeners to say thank you so much for your thoughts, for your experiences, for your wisdom today. And we appreciate your caring and sharing with us. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.